The pilot froze when he saw one name on the passenger list: the man who killed his daughter. With a child's life hanging in the balance and the plane grounded, he faced an unthinkable choice: fly with his greatest enemy, or let an innocent girl die. What happened next shocked everyone on board. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The airfield was quiet, just the way Captain Harold Miles liked it. The first light of morning skimmed across the tarmac, turning the silver body of the Gulfstream jet into a pale mirror for the rising sun. A breeze moved lazily through the palms bordering the private runway just outside Los Angeles, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and sea salt. For Harold, this time of day always felt like a reset, a chance to breathe before the world caught up. He stood at the base of the aircraft in full uniform, her arm-pressed slacks, polished shoes, and a cap pulled low enough to shade his tired eyes. At 62, Harold had flown just about everything with wings. But this plane, this jet, was his favorite. She was sleek, responsive, reliable. He knew every panel, every system, every tiny sound she made when things were working just right. Harold walked the perimeter slowly, dragging his fingers across the cool metal. He checked the landing gear, examined the engines, crouched to inspect the tires. His eyes, though lined and weary, missed nothing. 37 years in the air had taught him that problems were never loud, they whispered. He listened closely. The ground crew chief, a younger man named Tony, waved from across the runway. "Morning, Captain Miles," he called, clipboard in hand. "She's fueled and ready to go. Portland, right?" Harold nodded. "Portland. Should be a smooth flight." Tony smiled and disappeared into the hangar. Harold stepped back and looked at the aircraft one more time. No matter how many hours he'd flown, there was still a moment before every flight when he looked at the jet like an old friend. He didn't believe in magic, but there was something sacred about flying. It was the one place where grief couldn't reach him. At least, not always. The cabin door clicked open, and a familiar voice called down, "Coffee's brewing, and I made sure you got the good beans this time." Harold looked up to see his co-pilot, Mia Vargas, grinning at him from the top of the stairs. She was in her early 30s, sharp and unshakable. They'd been flying together for 4 years now. Mia had the instincts of someone born to fly, and she never let anything slide. Harold trusted her more than he trusted most people on the ground. "Don't play with my heart like that," he said as he climbed the stairs. "You know those beans are the only reason I show up." Mia laughed and handed him a fresh cup as he stepped inside the cabin. The interior was pristine. Polished wood accents, leather seats, and sun pouring through the oval windows gave it the quiet feel of a first-class library. VIPs liked their silence. Harold liked it too. Mia walked toward the cockpit while Harold took a long sip from his mug. Strong, dark, no sugar. Exactly how he liked it. He followed her down the aisle, brushing past rows of unoccupied luxury seats. Every surface gleamed. There was a calmness inside the aircraft that Harold always appreciated before a flight. Stillness, order, precision. It was the opposite of what he carried inside. The cockpit welcomed him like it always did. The panels lit up in their usual glow, switches responding to his fingers like muscle memory. He slid into the captain's seat. Everything fit. Everything made sense up here. He adjusted the seat, settled in, and started the routine checklist out loud with Mia. "Battery power on." "Battery power on," Mia confirmed. "Hydraulics check." "Hydraulics good." "Fuel pumps." "Checked and balanced." It went on like that for several minutes. Familiar, grounding. Their rhythm was smooth and unspoken. They had done this dozens of times together, and it always worked. Harold's heart was calm now, his hands steady. He checked the weather again. Clear skies between Los Angeles and Portland. Winds light, conditions perfect. "Got the passenger manifest?" he asked. Mia reached into her folder and handed him a sheet of paper. "Just came through. You've got 4 today. Mr. Reeves, his assistant, a doctor flying for some pediatric emergency, and—" She trailed off, glancing at the last name. Harold took the list without looking, too focused on confirming cabin pressure. "What kind of emergency?" "Not sure," Mia said. "But it sounds serious. The hospital in Portland's expecting her." Harold nodded and finally glanced down at the list. The first name he saw made him pause, not out of concern, but out of recognition. Keanu Reeves. Harold had flown him once before. Quiet man, polite, spoke little but listened intently. No drama, no demands. A rare kind of passenger, especially in his line of work. He moved on to the second name, Rachel Kim, and the third, Dr. Esther Monroe. Then he saw the fourth. His hand stopped moving. His thumb went limp against the paper. His chest tightened. The room, once so familiar and warm, suddenly turned cold. Jonas Keller. The name was ordinary, plain, even. But to Harold it was a thunderclap. Every hair on his arms stood up. He stared at the page, hoping his eyes were wrong. Hoping that there were 2 Jonas Kellers in the world, and that this one had nothing to do with the other. But there weren't 2. There was only one. One man who, 6 years ago, had made a decision so careless it shattered Harold's life forever. Jonas Keller, the man who drove drunk, the man who hit a teenager walking home from a school robotics meeting, the man who left Lily Miles with injuries she would never recover from. Harold's grip tightened around the manifest. His breath grew shallow. The cockpit, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He hadn't seen that name in years. But the memories came back instantly. Lily's smile the morning of the accident, her hand stained with ink from the poster they'd made together for her science fair. She had just turned 16. She had dreams of working at NASA. She wanted to build spacecraft. She used to tell him, "Dad, I'll design the one you fly on your last day in the air." That dream never made it past October 15th. Harold stood up abruptly, bumping the edge of the instrument panel. The seat rolled back behind him. Mia looked over, startled. "Captain," she asked, "you all right?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His body was already moving, muscle and memory be damned. He stepped out of the cockpit, down the aisle, and out the cabin door. The sun hit his face like a slap, but it was better than the cold that had settled in his chest. He descended the stairs 2 at a time and walked past the wing, barely noticing Tony waving at him again. "Everything good, Captain?" Tony called. Harold didn't respond. Inside the crew building, he found a bench near the glass wall that overlooked the runway. He sat down, chest heaving, his hands clenched tightly around the folded paper in his fist. He stared out at the empty sky and imagined Lily's voice, laughing as she rode her bike, yelling back at him that she'd be home in 10 minutes. That was the last time he saw her alive. 6 years. 6 years he had kept his pain folded up like that manifest. Controlled. Contained. Filed away in places no one could reach. He thought he'd moved forward. Maybe not healed, but functioning. He still flew, still followed every checklist, still kept his life airtight. But now the man who'd destroyed his world was about to board his plane. His plane. Harold stood up and pulled out his phone. He called the operations office. When the supervisor answered, Harold kept his voice low. "This is Captain Miles. I'm stepping away from today's flight. I won't be flying to Portland." There was silence on the other end. Then a confused reply. "Captain, everything okay?" Harold stared at the manifest again. The name still sat there. Small, clean, unforgiving. "No," Harold said softly. "No, it's not." Harold leaned against the window inside the crew building, staring out across the runway as the sun rose higher into the sky. Planes came and went in the distance, their engines a soft rumble in the background. But he didn't hear them. All he could hear was Lily's voice, bright, curious, and full of life. "Dad, how fast can a rocket go before it escapes Earth's gravity?" She'd asked him that the night before the accident, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by colored pencils and a half-finished poster board with the words "Mission to Mars" scrawled across the top. He remembered kneeling beside her, brushing her hair back from her face as he answered her question, telling her about escape velocity and gravity wells. She had smiled and said, "Then one day I'll design a ship that goes even faster. Faster than anything we've ever built." She never got the chance. 3 days after the accident, after surgeries and machines and long, desperate hours in a sterile hospital room, Harold had stood at her bedside while the heart monitor flatlined, her small hand in his, her hair still smelling faintly of the strawberry shampoo she loved. Now, that same pain was surging up again, unfiltered, raw, immediate. 6 years of trying to bury it, outrun it, outfly it, and one name had brought it roaring back. Harold pulled out his phone again and scrolled to the number for the airline's executive coordinator. He hit call. After 2 rings, a calm voice picked up. "This is Jason Foster?" "It's Harold," he said, voice hoarse. "Captain Miles, everything all right? Your wheel's up in under an hour. I won't be flying today." There was a pause. "I'm sorry? I'm stepping off the flight. You'll need to find another captain." Jason's tone shifted, concern creeping in. "Are you sick? Is this an emergency?" "It's not medical," Harold said, "but it's urgent." Another pause. Then Jason said carefully, "Harold, we've got a full manifest. High prophylax passengers. One of them is Keanu Reeves. We're under contract. Can you at least tell me what's going on?" Harold looked down at the name again. Jonas Keller. The letters hadn't changed. His grip tightened on the paper. "There's someone on that flight," Harold said. "Someone I can't be near. I can't sit in that cockpit knowing he's 30 feet behind me." Jason lowered his voice. "Are you saying this is personal?" "Yes," Harold said. "It's deeply personal." Jason didn't push further. After a moment he said, "All right, I'll get someone in the air within the hour." "Thank you," Harold replied, and ended the call. He stared at the phone for a long moment before sliding it back into his jacket. His hands were trembling. Behind him, the glass door opened, footsteps approached. He didn't turn around. "You just walked off the plane," Mia's voice said behind him. "What's going on, Harold?" Harold stayed silent for a few moments, staring out at the empty airstrip. His breath still hadn't returned to normal. Mia stepped closer, concern thick in her voice. "You're shaking," she said gently. "I've never seen you like this. What happened?" Harold slowly turned around. His face looked years older than it had an hour ago. His jaw clenched, once, then again. Finally, he held out the crumpled passenger manifest. Mia took it carefully and scanned the names. When she reached the 4th one, her eyes lifted to meet his. "You know this guy?" "I know what he did." The words fell heavy in the space between them. Mia didn't ask for more right away. She respected Harold too much for that. But she also knew something serious had just happened. Something that threatened to derail a flight with a medical emergency on board and 4 lives connected by it. Harold rubbed his forehead. "I can't fly that man, not today. Not ever." Mia folded the paper, her voice low. "Harold, you want to tell me who he is?" Harold sat down on the bench again, slower this time, as if gravity had doubled. He stared at the floor, then at his hands. "6 years ago," he began, "my daughter was walking home from school. She stayed late for robotics club. She texted me, said she'd be home by 6. I was making dinner." He paused, swallowing hard. "He never made it. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her while she was in the crosswalk. Witnesses said he didn't even brake." Mia sat down beside him, still holding the paper. She was in a coma for 3 days, machines keeping her breathing. Her brain had shut down. We stayed with her. Me, her mom, my brother. Just hoping for a miracle. Mia's voice was quiet. I remember hearing about that crash. You never said it was your daughter. I didn't want people to treat me like the grieving pilot. I just needed the cockpit. Flying was the only place I didn't have to talk about it. Mia glanced down at the manifest again. Jonas Keller. Harold nodded. Helm went to prison, Mia said softly. Right? 18 months, Harold replied bitterly. That's all. He served half for good behavior. Meanwhile, I buried my daughter. The silence that followed stretched out like a scar. Planes lifted into the sky in the distance. The world moved forward. But for Harold, time had stalled on the day he said goodbye to Lily. I thought I was done with this, he said. I thought I could function again. But that name, it brought everything back. Mia didn't try to fill the silence this time. She let it sit. She knew grief like this couldn't be patched or reasoned with. All she could do was sit beside him. Harold leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the pressure in his chest unrelenting. He'd faced turbulent skies, emergency landings, even near engine failure over the Rockies once, but nothing had ever unraveled him like this. I thought I could be bigger than it, he said. I thought time would dull it. But now he's sitting out there, sipping coffee like he's just another man going about his day. Mia took a slow breath, weighing her words. Do you think he knows who's flying the plane? Harold shook his head. Doubt it. I'm sure he thinks I moved on. I'm sure he's told himself he paid his debt. But there's no debt big enough for what he took from me. He stood again, pacing a few steps in front of the glass wall. I need you to take this flight, he said finally. You're qualified, you know the systems, you can handle it. Mia looked up, surprised. You want me to captain it? You're ready? But what about the hospital passenger, the emergency? Harold turned, his eyes full of pain. Then let them assign another pilot. But I can't sit in that cockpit. Not with him behind me, not with that name printed on my manifest like it means nothing. Mia was quiet for a long beat. Then she stood and handed the manifest back to Harold. I understand, Harold, I do. I just wish I could fix it. He gave her a look that wasn't angry but exhausted. Some things don't get fixed, Mia. They just get buried. Until they come back. Mia nodded, then walked slowly back toward the jet. The morning sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The plane sat gleaming and still, unaware of the storm it had stirred. Harold stayed behind. Inside the lounge, the flight crew waited in silence. The assistant, Rachel Kim, glanced toward the windows, sensing something was off. Keanu Reeves sat nearby, quiet as always, but his gaze occasionally drifted to Harold through the glass. A few feet away, a man named Jonas Keller finished the last line of his journal entry. He closed the worn leather notebook and stared down at his hands. He didn't know the pilot's name. He didn't know the past was about to collide with the present. And he didn't know that today, this one quiet morning at a private airport, was about to become the most important day of his life. Jonas Keller sat in the farthest corner of the terminal lounge, away from the tall windows and polished counters. The morning sun filtered through blinds, casting a striped glow across the leather journal in his lap. He had just finished scribbling the final sentence on page 2217, a page like all the others, a letter never meant to be mailed. He paused, looked down at the page, and read the line to himself. I saw her face again last night. She was wearing that green hoodie, the one with the spaceship patch. He sighed, then closed the journal softly. The leather was worn smooth by years of use. On the spine, faded gold letters still read, Letters to Lily, a name he never spoke aloud anymore. 6 years. Every morning since the crash, Jonas had written a letter to the girl whose life he'd taken. Some letters were short, some pages long. Some were confessions, Others were apologies. A few had been written through tears, others in total silence. He had never mailed them, he never would, but the act of writing them, of imagining her receiving them, was the only way he'd managed to stay sober. Jonas hadn't touched a drop of alcohol since the day of the crash. Not at the halfway house, not during parole, not when he came home to find his family gone, not even on the day the state closed the case and wiped the slate clean. He hadn't cleaned the slate, not in his heart. Today, he carried something heavier than words. In his carry-on bag, zipped in a brown envelope, was a cashier's check for $2 million, an anonymous donation to the Lily Miles Pediatric Trauma Wing at St. Bridget's Hospital in Portland. The wing had been quietly built over the past 2 years. Jonas had used a network of lawyers and nonprofits to move the funds. No one knew it was him. He didn't want his name on a plaque. He didn't want forgiveness either. He just wanted that building to exist. He wanted Lily's name to live where it should have, in a place filled with children, healing, and second chances. Something she never got. He stared at the coffee cooling beside him and rubbed his thumb along the journal's edge. He had never stopped grieving, not a single day, but he had turned that grief into something quiet and sacred, something redemptive, and he was determined to carry that through to the end. What he didn't know was that the man who lost Lily was 30 yards away, standing in the shadows behind a pane of glass, and the actor seated just 3 chairs down from him, silent, watchful, reading a battered script, was about to change the course of his life forever. Jonas glanced up briefly as a small group of flight staff entered the lounge, murmuring updates among themselves. He didn't pay them much attention. Airports were always full of movement. People with headsets, crisp uniforms, tired eyes. His own eyes drifted to the runway, where the tail of the sleek Gulfstream jet shimmered in the sunlight. He had always hated flying. It wasn't the height or the turbulence. It was the stillness. Too much time to think, too many memories waiting to creep back into the quiet spaces. But today, the flight had a purpose. A mission, even. He pulled the envelope from his bag again, double-checked the address, and then slid it back carefully. The money was everything he had left from his father's inheritance, some investments, and what remained after he sold the last of his tech company shares. He didn't care about wealth anymore. He hadn't for a long time. The most valuable thing he owned was that journal, and even that he planned to leave behind someday. He hadn't noticed that the man sitting a few seats away had been watching him. Keanu Reeves closed his script quietly and leaned back, eyes flicking toward the journal with gentle curiosity. He hadn't meant to intrude, but something about Jonas caught his attention. Jonas looked weathered, not just older, but worn down, like a man carrying something that never got lighter, no matter how far he walked. Keanu had seen that look before, on war veterans, on grieving fathers, on men in prison visiting rooms. Jonas felt the gaze and turned slightly. "Sorry," Keanu said, offering a polite nod. "Didn't mean to stare." Jonas managed a tired smile. "No offense taken." Keanu glanced down at the journal. "That a travel log or something more personal?" Jonas hesitated, then said softly, "It's personal." Keanu nodded once. "Good. We need more people writing things that matter." Jonas looked down at the journal in his lap. "Not sure if it matters, but it helps." There was a pause between them. Keanu didn't press. He rarely did. But there was something in Jonas's tone that stayed with him, like a tremor in a note that kept echoing long after the piano key was released. The silence between them stretched into something comfortable. Outside, the flight crew finished loading supplies. A new captain was walking toward the jet. Mia, still dressed and ready, stood at the edge of the boarding stairs, eyes scanning the lounge through the glass. She saw Keanu, then Jonas, then the empty seat where Harold should have been. She exhaled slowly and walked back toward the aircraft. Inside the lounge, Jonas reopened his journal and wrote a single sentence across the next blank page. "I'm not sure what I'll say when I get there, but I have to go anyway." Jonas placed the pen carefully back into the loop stitched along the journal's spine, then closed the book and pressed his palm to its cover for a long moment. He didn't say a word, didn't whisper a prayer. He simply breathed, and that breath held the weight of everything he hadn't said aloud in 6 years. A quiet voice cut through his thoughts. "Boarding in 10 minutes. Mr. Keller, you'll be in seat 3A. He looked up to see a young attendant with a clipboard, offering a polite smile. Jonas nodded, gave a quiet thanks, and tucked the journal into his bag beside the envelope. When the attendant moved on, he stayed seated, eyes on the jet outside. He didn't know what the others on board would think of him. They wouldn't know who he was. To them, he was just another quiet passenger with shadows under his eyes. And that was fine. He wasn't here to be seen. Across the lounge, Keanu Reeves stood and stretched slowly. He looked over at Jonas again, studying him not with judgment, but with curiosity. Something about that man reminded him of people he had lost, of grief worn down into humility. He crossed the space between them. "You headed to Portland?" Keanu asked. Jonas nodded. "Yeah. You too?" "Yeah. Visiting someone at St. Bridget's." Jonas froze slightly, but tried not to show it. "St. Bridget's?" "My friend's daughter. She's having surgery in the trauma wing," Keanu said. "The new one." Jonas's heart jumped. He tried to keep his voice steady. "The Lily Miles wing?" Keanu smiled softly. "Yeah. You've heard of it?" Jonas nodded once. "I have. It's a special place." Keanu watched him a moment longer, then offered a hand. "I'm Keanu." Jonas hesitated, then took it. "Jonas." They shook, and the handshake was firm but respectful. Keanu didn't recognize the name. Jonas could tell. And he didn't offer anything else. He wasn't ready. Not yet. "Safe flight," Keanu said with a kind nod, then stepped away to retrieve his bag. Jonas watched him walk. It struck him. This man, someone the world knew by face who could have flown in total silence, had chosen to speak to a stranger. There was something comforting in that. Something rare. The boarding call came. Passengers began to rise. Jonas shouldered his bag and walked to the gate. With each step toward the aircraft, his pulse quickened. He was about to board the plane that would take him to the city where Lily's name lived on a wall he had paid to build. But more than that, he was stepping into a moment that would challenge everything he believed about forgiveness, grief, and the quiet search for redemption. He still didn't know the pilot he had nearly flown with. Still didn't know the storm his name had triggered. But that was about to change. Keanu Reeves stepped quietly into the private terminal, his assistant Rachel Kim trailing a few paces behind him with a discreet rolling suitcase in tow. Dressed simply in jeans, a dark jacket, and worn boots, Keanu moved without fanfare. A few staff members glanced up, recognizing him instantly, but he gave a polite nod that signaled his usual request. No attention, no fuss. Rachel tapped something into her phone, then caught up. "They're holding the flight for now. Captain's being replaced last minute, not sure why." Keanu raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Hope it's not serious?" "No details, but they said it won't affect arrival time. We're still expected to land before noon in Portland." He nodded, grateful. It mattered more today than usual. As they stepped into the lounge, Keanu scanned the space out of instinct. A man sat in the corner with a journal. Another woman, sharp eyes, white coat slung over her suitcase, sat with a thick binder in her lap. The others kept to themselves, phones and tablets glowing quietly. Rachel leaned in. "Dr. Monroe's here too, that's her," she whispered, motioning to the woman reading across the room. "She's the one flying for that pediatric emergency." Keanu walked over. "Dr. Monroe?" he said gently. The woman looked up, startled for a second, then stood. Yes, Keanu Reeves. He shook her hand with both of his. I heard about your mission, he said. Thank you for what you're doing. Her face softened. She hadn't expected recognition, let alone gratitude. It's urgent, she replied. 9-year-old girl, car accident, spinal compression. If we don't get the surgical prep done today, we lose the window. Is she stable? Barely. Her parents are already in Portland. The hospital's prepping everything. I just need to be there. Keanu motioned to the empty chair beside her. Mind if I sit for a moment? Not at all. He leaned in, voice low. Is the hospital short on anything? Equipment, post-ops, support? Dr. Monroe blinked, surprised. They're managing, but the girl's family doesn't have insurance. I've already waived my fee, and we're trying to set up temporary rehab after surgery. Keanu nodded slowly. If she makes it through, let me help with the rest. Physical therapy, home equipment, whatever she needs. Dr. Monroe stared at him for a beat, speechless. Then, quietly, she said, You have no idea what that means. Actually, he said with a faint smile, I might. Rachel glanced over from where she was making a call and gave him a soft thumbs up. Keanu stood, wished the doctor safe travels, and walked over to the counter, where fresh coffee was being poured. He looked back at the man in the corner, the one with the journal. Something about the guy's posture struck him. Still, tense, like he was bracing for news that hadn't arrived yet. Keanu poured 2 cups, carried them over, and offered one. Morning, he said quietly. Coffee? Jonas looked up, surprised. He hadn't expected conversation, much less kindness. He took the coffee slowly, his fingers brushing Keanu's for a moment. Thank you, Jonas said, voice low but steady. Keanu sat down across from him, both men holding steaming cups. For a while, they didn't say anything. The silence wasn't awkward. It was gentle, respectful. Keanu often let silences do the heavy lifting. He'd learned that sometimes what wasn't said revealed more than any explanation could. After a minute, he asked, You headed to Portland for work or family? Jonas hesitated, then said, Something in between. Keanu smiled faintly. That's a good answer. Jonas looked down at the journal beside him. He tapped a finger on the leather cover. Actually, I'm delivering a donation to the Lily Miles Trauma Wing at St. Bridget's. Keanu's brow lifted slightly. I've heard of it. That's where Dr. Monroe's heading. Jonas nodded. It's a good place. I wanted to help. Keanu didn't ask more. Something in Jonas's voice had weight behind it, a kind of grief that wasn't new, but hadn't softened with time. He recognized it. He had carried it himself after losing his daughter, and then again after losing River. He took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle before asking gently, Do you know the family? Of Lily Miles? Jonas blinked once, then slowly shook his head. Not personally. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Not yet. Keanu could sense the wall. He didn't try to push through it. Instead, he nodded and shifted the subject. First-class coffee, huh? He joked softly, lifting the paper cup. Jonas chuckled. Better than I expected. You'd be surprised how many places serve mud and call it luxury. Jonas cracked a smile. This your usual travel circuit? Keanu shrugged. Less than it used to be. I pick my moments now. Try to show up when it counts. Jonas studied him. That girl, Dr. Monroe's patient. You offered to help. You don't even know her. I don't have to, Keanu said. She's someone's daughter. Jonas looked down, throat tight. The words stung in a way he didn't expect. Keanu noticed but said nothing. He let Jonas hold the silence this time. Behind them, Rachel returned with an update. They've cleared a new pilot. We're boarding in 10. Keanu nodded, then turned back to Jonas. You want to walk out together? Jonas looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah. I think I'd like that." As they stood, something shifted, not resolved, not forgiven, but seen. And for Jonas, that was more than he had dared to hope for. Jonas followed Keanu toward the boarding gate, both carrying their cups, neither speaking much. It was a quiet kind of company, unspoken, comfortable. Just before they reached the door, Keanu paused and motioned for Jonas to go first. Jonas gave a small nod of thanks and stepped forward. At the gate, the attendant greeted them with a warm smile and a slight bow. "Mr. Reeves, Mr. Keller, welcome aboard. You'll find your seats just ahead. Flight time is 2 hours and 17 minutes. Keanu smiled politely and stepped through. As they walked the short jet bridge to the aircraft, Jonas felt his chest tighten. He hadn't flown much since prison and never in anything this luxurious, but that wasn't what made him uneasy. It was the finality of what he was carrying. The envelope, the journal, his promise. He paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at the plane. Keanu stopped beside him. "You all right?" Jonas nodded. "Yeah, just first time doing something like this." Keanu gave him a reassuring look. Then, "It matters." Those words stayed with Jonas as he stepped into the cabin. Inside, the jet was stunning. Spacious leather seats, polished wood trim, soft overhead lighting, a quiet hum of readiness. Rachel moved toward the back, checking last-minute logistics. Dr. Monroe sat already, reviewing notes, her jaw tight with focus. Jonas took seat 3A. Keanu sat across the aisle in 3B. They buckled in. A moment later, Mia stepped into the cabin and nodded to the crew. She was calm, poised, fully in command. Jonas didn't recognize her. But Mia had seen the name. She didn't let it show on her face. She took her place in the cockpit and began the pre-flight checklist. The doors sealed. The engines whispered to life. Jonas looked out the window as the runway rolled into view. His fingers tapped restlessly on the armrest, but the journal on his lap kept him grounded. It was real. He was doing this, not for redemption, not for praise, but because Lily deserved it. Keanu leaned over slightly. "What are you going to do when you land?" Jonas looked down. "Deliver something, and maybe visit the wing, if they'll let me walk through." Keanu nodded slowly. "I think they will." Jonas swallowed hard. "You think people can change, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu looked at him carefully. "I think some people already have. They're just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up." Jonas didn't reply, but his eyes said more than words ever could. The jet rolled forward, lifting gently from the runway. As the clouds opened above them, two men sat across from each other, one carrying fame, the other a weight he could no longer keep to himself. And the sky, open, silent, and infinite, held room for them both. Harold Miles sat motionless on the edge of a rust-stained bench outside the hangar where the hum of turbines and rolling luggage had faded into background noise. His hands were clasped tightly between his knees. The tarmac stretched out before him like an empty road. He didn't want to walk anymore. He'd watched the plane lift off just 15 minutes earlier, watched its sleek form disappear into the clouds, carrying a man he couldn't look at without his throat tightening. His chest still ached from holding it all in. Behind him, a soft pair of footsteps approached. Mia Vargas didn't say anything right away. She stood a few feet back, letting the silence acknowledge itself before stepping into it. "You gonna tell me what happened?" she asked. Harold didn't turn. His voice came out hoarse. "You already know. I know you refused to fly," she said, "but not why." He stayed quiet for a few more seconds, then he said, "His name was on the manifest." Mia's brow furrowed. "Whose name?" "Jonas Keller." The name didn't register immediately. Then it clicked. Mia's expression shifted. Harold finally turned, eyes rimmed red but dry. 6 years ago. He was driving drunk. Ran a red light doing 60. Smashed into Lily's car. My daughter. Mia's voice softened. The one who wanted to go to MIT? He nodded. Yeah. She'd just turned 17. Was coming home from tutoring a middle school girl in math. The sweetest kid. Funny. Too smart for her own good. He looked out at the tarmac again. She made it to the hospital but never woke up. 3 days. Tubes, machines, the works. I sat there holding her hand, talking to her, telling her to hang on. He swallowed hard. And then, the third night, the nurse just shook her head. Said it was time. Mia sat slowly on the bench beside him. I didn't even get to say goodbye properly, he said. She was already gone by the time I realized it. Mia laid her hands in her lap, fingers still, listening. Jonas got 18 months, Harold said. 18. For manslaughter. Served a year. Came out clean. Didn't say a word to us. No letter, no apology, no explanation, just gone. Mia looked at him. You ever tried to track him down? What would be the point? Harold muttered. Nothing he says brings her back. There was a long silence between them, the kind that stretches into memory, then settles in the bones. I thought I moved on, Harold said. I remarried. I kept flying. I even told myself I'd forgiven him. But then I saw that name on the list, printed right there, and something in me snapped. My hands started shaking. I couldn't breathe. Mia whispered, and so you walked. Yeah, I walked. Mia sat with her elbows resting on her knees, eyes fixed ahead at the runway, as if staring at the path of the plane that had just left. Her voice came out steady. You should have told me sooner. You didn't have to carry it alone. Harold gave a bitter laugh. Some things you carry because you have to. It's not a matter of choosing. He glanced sideways at her. Ever lost someone and felt like the rest of the world just kept moving? Like traffic didn't stop, the lights stayed green, people kept sipping coffee like nothing happened? Mia nodded slowly. Yeah, when my dad died. He was a mechanic for 35 years. Lung cancer. The airport didn't stop for him either. Harold softened a little. I'm sorry. They were quiet again. Then Mia asked, So what now? You just never fly again? He scoffed. No, I just couldn't fly today. Not with him on board. Not when I'd be sitting 10 feet away from the man who tore my daughter out of this world. Her brow furrowed. What if he's not that man anymore? Harold turned sharply. Don't start down that road. I'm not saying he deserves your forgiveness, she said gently. But what if he's been carrying something too? Harold shook his head. Carrying what? Guilt? Regret? Good for him. He should. I hope it eats at him every day like it eats at me. Mia let the words land, then said carefully, It might be. But you don't know what he's done since. You haven't seen him. Haven't heard from him. Isn't that part of what's eating at you? Harold looked away, jaw tight. He never said sorry, not once. Maybe he thought you'd never listen. Maybe I wouldn't have. Mia didn't press further. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the edge of Harold's flight jacket. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, paper-wrapped sandwich she hadn't touched since morning. She offered it to him. He waved it off. She said it between them anyway. I don't know what you believe, she said softly. But I believe people can change. Not all of them, but some. And the ones who do? They're usually the ones who hurt the most. Harold stared at the tarmac again, blinking against something behind his eyes. I don't know if I believe that. Then maybe today's the start. He didn't reply. Behind them, the sound of another jet taking off filled the air. Harold watched it vanish into the sky. Part of him wanted to be up there. Part of him never wanted to leave the ground again. The wind had picked up, cooler now as morning turned toward afternoon. Harold rubbed his hands together for warmth, though he wasn't sure if it was the breeze or the conversation that had chilled him. Mia stood, brushing dust from her slacks. She looked down at him, her voice quiet but firm. "You did the right thing not flying," she said. "If your hands were shaking that badly, it wasn't safe. You put the passengers first, even through your grief. That matters." Harold looked up at her, guilt lining his face. "Then why do I feel like I failed?" "Because you're human," she said. "Because this kind of pain doesn't follow checklists." He let out a sigh. "I've spent 6 years pretending I was okay, going through the motions, smiling at safety briefings, logging hours like nothing broke inside me. But when I saw that name, it was like Lily died all over again." Mia stepped closer. "Maybe it's time to stop pretending." Herrick looked down at the sandwich she'd left on the bench, then back up at her. "I wish I could forgive him," he said, voice cracked. "But I can't. Not today, not ever." "I'm not asking you to," she replied. "I'm just asking if you're willing to look." He didn't respond. His silence was the kind that weighed heavily on the air between them, the kind that carried the echo of everything unspoken. Loss, bitterness, love, and the fragile longing for peace. After a while, Mia said, "You know the plane made it up safely. He's on it. So is Keanu. And Dr. Monroe." Harold raised his head slightly. "Monroe?" "Means the pediatric surgeon, flying to operate on that little girl in Portland, the one with spinal trauma?" Harold blinked. "I didn't know she was on that manifest." "She was. And Keanu's helping pay for the girl's rehab afterward." He looked out at the sky, quiet, then asked, "What's her name?" "The girl? Abigail." Harold repeated it softly to himself. "Abigail." He stood slowly, his knees stiff from sitting too long. He looked at Mia with tired eyes. "Thanks for listening." She offered him a small smile. "Anytime." As Harold turned to walk back toward the crew building, she called after him. "You said you couldn't forgive him," she said. "But if he's trying to make something right, would you want to know?" Harold didn't answer. He just kept walking. But something about the way his shoulders moved, slightly less hunched, slightly more aware, suggested the question had planted itself somewhere deeper than either of them could see. Rachel Kim had been answering emails on her tablet for the last 30 minutes, but something kept pulling her attention back to Jonas Keller. The man was calm, polite, and quiet, but there was a weight about him. The way he held his coffee, the journal he guarded like a lifeline, the long glances he gave out the window even mid-flight. Something about it didn't sit right, not in a dangerous way, just unresolved. She watched him for another few seconds, then leaned toward Keanu, who was reading a printed briefing about the Portland event. "Do you know who that guy is?" she asked quietly. Keanu looked up. "Jonas?" "Yeah." Keanu shook his head. "Not really. Just talked to him a bit in the lounge. He's donating to a hospital." Rachel's brows furrowed. "I swear I've seen that name before." She tapped her screen, opened a browser, and typed quickly. After a few false starts and a dozen links, she landed on something that made her freeze. Her face shifted as she read, eyes scanning the article headline twice to be sure. "Man sentenced in DUI crash that killed promising teen. Jonas Keller pleads guilty to vehicular manslaughter." She clicked deeper into the article. There was a photo of Jonas, 6 years younger, thinner, in handcuffs. The accompanying story was devastating. A high school honor student, 17, killed on her way home from tutoring. The driver was under the influence, ran a light and struck her car. She never woke up. Rachel stared at the screen, then slowly whispered, "Oh my God." Keanu leaned toward her. "What is it?" Rachel turned the screen to face him. "That's Jonas, the guy sitting across from you. 6 years ago, he killed a girl named Lily Miles in a drunk driving accident." Keanu blinked. "Wait, Lily Miles?" Rachel nodded. Doesn't that last name sound familiar? Keanu sat back, thinking. The pilot, Harold Miles? Rachel nodded again, slowly. That's why he didn't fly today. Keanu's gaze shifted toward the cabin wall. It made sense now. The emotion in Jonas's eyes, Harold walking away without explanation, the tension that had hung in the air since morning without a name. That's why the flight is delayed, Keanu said, almost to himself. Rachel lowered her voice. I don't know what Jonas is doing on this flight, but he's carrying something. I saw the way he looked at that journal, like it's all he's got left. Keanu nodded once. He told me he was donating to the Lily Miles trauma wing. Rachel looked stunned. He's donating? To the hospital named after the girl he killed? Keanu nodded again. He didn't mention the connection, just said he wanted to help. Rachel looked down. Maybe this flight isn't just about Portland. Rachel closed the article on her tablet, then set it in her lap, hands folded tight. She glanced back at Jonas, seated quietly, head resting against the window. From the outside, he looked peaceful, but now that she knew, everything about him seemed different. The silence wasn't casual. It was earned. It was penitence. She looked at Keanu. You think Harold knows where Jonas is going? I doubt it, Keanu said. He couldn't even bear to stay on the flight. There's no way he knows. Rachel hesitated. So what do we do? Keanu leaned back in his seat, eyes distant. His voice was gentle but thoughtful. We don't do anything yet. Rachel looked puzzled. Keanu continued. Sometimes people need space before truth enters. You force it too soon, it shatters everything. Rachel nodded slowly, but something still tugged at her. You know, she said softly, when Lily died, it was all over the news. I remember seeing her face. The headline said she was going to change the world. Keanu stared ahead. She probably would have. You think Jonas knows that? I think he's never stopped knowing it, Keanu replied. Rachel fell quiet, but then she looked back at Keanu, her voice softer now. You lost your daughter too, didn't you? Keanu nodded slowly. Yeah. She never got the chance to take her first breath. But she was real to me, still is. Rachel leaned closer. Then maybe you're the only one who can reach Harold. Keanu hesitated. His jaw tensed slightly. You've carried the weight, she added. You know what it's like to live with loss. But you also know what it's like to keep walking. He looked at her, eyes thoughtful. You think he'd listen? Not to Keanu Reeves the actor, Rachel said, but maybe to the father, who knows what it's like to lose a child and still get on a plane the next day. Keanu considered that. Rachel added, Harold's not angry because he's cruel. He's angry because no one ever gave him space to hurt out loud. No one ever said, I see you. Maybe it's time someone did. Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window beside him, watching the clouds slowly drift past. Then, he nodded once. If I can find him, I'll try. Rachel placed a hand on his arm. Thank you. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the pilot's voice, updating them on their descent. Keanu exhaled slowly. I'll need to speak to Mia when we land. She'll know where he is. Rachel nodded, her voice firm. I'll help however I can. And as the jet angled gently downward toward Portland, what had started as a routine flight was now something entirely different. A journey not only through the skies, but toward understanding, pain, and the smallest possibility of peace. As the clouds gave way to glimpses of the city below, Rachel quietly closed her tablet and tucked it away. Her gaze drifted to Jonas one last time. His eyes were closed, his hand resting on top of the worn journal in his lap. The way he held it, fingers curled just enough to crease the leather, told her that whatever was inside wasn't casual. It was sacred, probably painful, and maybe healing. She glanced at Keanu again. "You okay?" He gave her a small nod, but his eyes were somewhere far away. Somewhere not in this plane, not in this moment. Maybe in a hospital room years ago. Maybe in a nursery that never saw the light. "I've never tried to talk someone out of grief before," he said. Rachel replied gently. "You're not trying to talk him out of anything? You're just showing him he's not the only one in it." The plane dipped lower. The runway stretched out in the distance. Keanu buckled his belt and folded his hands. He looked calm, but underneath something stirred. A quiet urgency. A responsibility he hadn't planned to carry when the day began. As the wheels touched down and the jet eased into taxi, Jonas stirred beside him. He opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a long dream. "Sleep okay?" Keanu asked. Jonas nodded. "I don't really sleep much, but that was better than usual." Keanu offered a faint smile. "Glad to hear it." The engine softened, and the plane rolled toward its final stop. The sky above Portland was overcast but clear enough to see the treetops beyond the terminal. A different air, a different energy. Once parked, passengers began to gather their things. Rachel stood to help with a bag overhead. Dr. Monroe moved briskly toward the front, ready to be rushed to the hospital, but Keanu stayed seated. He watched Jonas carefully, choosing his next words with care. "You ever think about speaking to her father?" Keanu asked. Jonas froze for a second. His grip on the journal tightened. "Every day," he whispered. "Why haven't you?" Jonas looked down. "Because I don't think I deserve to." Keanu's voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe, but maybe it's not about deserving, maybe it's about honoring." Jonas looked at him, unsure. "You think he'd want to see me?" "I don't know," Keanu said honestly. "But I think he deserves the truth. Even if it's hard." Jonas didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. As the door opened and the staircase lowered, Keanu stood and offered his hand. Jonas stared at it for a long second. Then finally he reached out and shook it. And in that small motion, something fragile passed between them. Not forgiveness, but the beginning of something that might lead there. The hangar doors were half open, letting in the overcast Portland light. Inside, Harold Miles stood alone beside a line of maintenance carts, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He stared at the empty tarmac as if waiting for something, though he didn't know what. Or who. The echo of footsteps drew closer. He didn't turn, not until he heard a voice, calm and low, behind him. "Captain Miles?" Harold turned slowly, and there stood Keanu Reeves. For a split second, confusion crossed Harold's face. He hadn't expected a celebrity, but Keanu didn't carry himself like one. No flash, no distance, just quiet sincerity. "I'm not here to ask about the flight," Keanu said. "I just wanted to talk." Harold narrowed his eyes slightly. "You came all this way for a conversation?" Keanu nodded. "If that's okay." Harold hesitated, then gave a nod and turned back toward the open hangar. Keanu joined him. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was reflective. Then Keanu finally said, "I heard about your daughter." Harold's body stiffened. He didn't reply. Keanu continued, "I lost mine too. Her name was Ava." That got Harold's attention. He turned slightly, his face softening with surprise. "She was stillborn," Keanu said. 18 years ago. Her mother and I were shattered. We had the nursery set up, had names picked, clothes folded. Then, gone, just like that." Harold's expression tightened. "It's not the same as what happened to you," Keanu said, "but that kind of loss, it leaves a scar. Doesn't matter how it happens." Harold looked at him fully now. "You live with it?" "Every day," Keanu replied. "But I've also learned something." "What's that?" "That pain doesn't shrink. You just get stronger holding it." Harold's gaze dropped to the concrete beneath their feet. He nodded once. Keanu took a breath. I met Jonas today. I didn't know who he was at first. He didn't tell me. Harold's body tensed again. He turned his head away. Elle told me he was flying here to make a donation to a trauma wing. Said it was named after a girl named Lily. Harold's jaw clenched. Didn't say more, Keanu added. Didn't try to justify anything, just wrote in his journal. Quiet. Alone, like he was still serving a sentence in his own mind. Harold stayed quiet. The wind whistled through the open space between hangar doors. I'm not defending him, Keanu said. I don't know what he was like 6 years ago. But I saw a man who isn't running from what he did. Harold's eyes finally lifted. That doesn't change what he did. No, Keanu agreed. But if he's trying to fix what he broke, doesn't that count for something? Harold's breath hitched. He took a step back, staring out at the quiet airstrip beyond the hangar doors. The question hung between them like fog, thick and hard to push through. What does it count for? Harold finally asked. It doesn't bring Lily back. It doesn't erase the screams I heard when I arrived at the hospital. It doesn't undo the nights I sat in her empty room, talking to her pillow like a madman. Keanu didn't move. He let Harold speak. In the world. He robbed her of her future, Harold went on, voice rising. College visits, prom, her first flight as a pilot, all of it. Gone. And now he gets to sit on planes again, make donations and write letters and pretend he's healed? That's not justice. No, it's not, Keanu said softly. But maybe it's remorse. Harold turned sharply. Remorse doesn't cut it. I agree. But neither does silence. And for 6 years you've been holding a storm inside you with no place to land. Harold's chest heaved. He turned away, gripping the back of a metal stool like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Keanu stepped closer. I'm not saying forgive him. I'm not even saying talk to him. I'm just asking, if a man carries the weight of his worst mistake every single day, should he be shut out from trying to do right by it? Harold didn't answer. Keanu paused, then added, When Ava died, people told me to move on, that she wasn't even born alive. But to me, she was real. And when I tried to honor her by supporting children's hospitals, I wasn't looking for redemption. I just didn't want her name to be followed only by silence. Harold's grip on the stool tightened. Jonas told me he's written letters to you, Keanu continued. Hundreds, but he never sent them. He didn't think you'd want them. And maybe you don't. But they exist. Because he couldn't let your daughter's name vanish either. Harold slowly turned his head. You read one? No, Keanu said. But I saw the journal. The man doesn't sleep, doesn't drink anymore, doesn't smile. He's not free. He's not moving on. He's carrying Lily with him. Harold looked down. For the first time, his eyes shimmered. I'm not asking you to forgive, Keanu said gently. I just thought you deserved to know the whole story. Before you closed the door forever. The air between them grew still again. This time, it was Harold who broke the silence. You ever wonder what your daughter would have looked like now? All the time, Keanu said. Harold gave a hollow nod. Me too. Harold leaned back against the workbench, the steel cold against his spine. His voice was lower now, almost a whisper. Jean had this idea once, he said. Told me she wanted to build aircraft that ran on solar power. Said she wanted to make the sky cleaner. I told her it was too ambitious. Keanu offered a quiet smile. Sounds like she dreamed big. Harold nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. She always did, even when I couldn't see it. They stood in silence again, but this time the quiet wasn't heavy, it was reverent. Heem died 3 days after the crash, Harold said, hooked to machines. Doctors said there was no brain activity, but I sat by her side anyway, read her pages from her science fair essays, played recordings of aircraft engines, anything to keep her in the air a little longer. Keanu's eyes softened. You kept her flying. Harold looked over. You know what I did the day after she passed? Keanu shook his head. I came back to work. Told everyone I couldn't sit in that house one more day. Took a flight to Vegas, then another to Seattle, just to feel like I had a purpose again. That's brave, Keanu said. No, Harold replied. It was fear. I was afraid that if I stayed still, I'd feel everything, and I couldn't afford to feel yet. Keanu nodded slowly, understanding that in his bones. Harold exhaled hard, rubbing his face. So, when I saw his name this morning, I wasn't just looking at the man who took my daughter. I was staring at the years I spent pretending I was fine, and I couldn't take off with that weight on board. I understand, Keanu said. Harold looked at him. Do you? Keanu nodded. Because I've learned that grief doesn't always crash. Sometimes it taxis. It waits on the runway until something forces it to take off again. Harold stared at the floor. Then, slowly, he looked back up. If I were to speak to him, he asked, what would I even say? Keanu didn't answer right away. He let the question sit. Maybe nothing, he finally said. Maybe just listen. Or maybe tell him about Lily, about what the world lost. Let him carry that truth with him wherever he goes next. Harold's face twitched. He's waiting, Keanu added. Not expecting, just waiting. Harold pressed his lips together. I don't know if I have it in me. You don't have to know, Keanu said. Just don't decide based on fear. The two men stood together, quiet again. And for the first time in years, Harold didn't feel alone with his pain. He still didn't have the answer. But for the first time, he was willing to ask the question. The private terminal in Portland was nearly empty, quiet with the soft hum of luggage carts and echoing footsteps in the distance. Jonas Keller sat near the wide glass wall, his leather journal in his lap, thumb pressed into its spine as if grounding himself. His bag sat beside him, unopened. He hadn't moved since the plane landed. Rachel Kim walked toward him, slowly and deliberately, clutching a bottled water she hadn't opened. She stopped a few feet from his chair. Mind if I sit? She asked. Jonas looked up. His eyes were tired, but he nodded. Rachel lowered herself into the seat beside him, keeping a respectful space between them. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just watched the airstrip beyond the glass, as he did. Then softly she asked, Do you think about her, Lily? Jonas didn't turn his head, but his shoulders went rigid. The journal in his hands trembled slightly. All the time, he said, his voice cracked on the last word. Rachel waited. She was brilliant, Jonas whispered. Smarter than I'll ever be. I didn't know her personally, just the newspaper articles, the tributes online. But I read every one of them, every single one. Rachel looked over at him, her expression unreadable. She wanted to be an aerospace engineer, Jonas continued. She had already built a glider prototype with her dad. They had this tradition, Sunday flight talks, I think it was called. Something just for them. His voice grew quieter. And I ended all of that. Jonas finally turned to face Rachel. His eyes were red, wet. Her father must have hated me, he said. I hated me. Rachel didn't reply. She let the truth hang between them. Jonas opened the journal slowly. I wanted to write to them, her parents, every day, but I never sent any of them. I didn't think I had the right. Rachel leaned forward slightly, watching him flip through the pages. They were filled with ink, scribbles, small sketches. Some entries looked like letters, others were copied quotes. There were children's drawings taped between pages, crayon rainbows, stick figure families. Messages like, "Thank you, Mr. Keller," in childlike handwriting. What is all this? She asked. Jonas traced a page with his finger. Letters, notes, names of the kids I've tried to help. Since the crash, I haven't touched a drop of alcohol. I've worked only part-time jobs. I didn't want to hide behind a career or make a show of redemption. I just wanted to serve quietly. So I started volunteering at trauma centers, teaching kids who'd been through what I caused, paid for treatment when I could, spoke at rehab clinics when no one else wanted to. Rachel's eyes softened. Jonas closed the journal again. I was supposed to deliver a check today, to the Lily Miles Trauma Wing. I'd been donating anonymously for years. This was the biggest one. But now, he shook his head. I didn't know Harold was the pilot. Rachel took a breath, folding her hands over her knee. Her voice was quiet but clear. He knows now. Jonas turned sharply. Harold? She nodded. Keanu went to speak with him. Jonas dropped his gaze, jaw tight. Then I need to go. I never meant to cross paths with him. I didn't come here to reopen wounds. Rachel tilted her head gently. But you didn't come here to run either. You came to honor her. Jonas's hands trembled as he held the journal against his chest. I came to drop off a donation and leave without being seen. That was the plan. It's always been the plan. Rachel studied him. You think avoiding him protects him? Jonas looked at her, eyes rimmed with moisture. Yes. But what if that's not what he needs anymore? He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Rachel pressed gently. Have you ever imagined what you'd say to him? Jonas nodded. Every day. And? He exhaled hard. I'd say I was sorry, but that's not enough. I'd tell him I pray for his daughter every night, even though I don't believe in anything anymore. I'd tell him I read about her dreams and tried to live in a way that wouldn't insult her memory. Rachel's voice softened. Have you ever told anyone that? Jonas shook his head slowly. No one's ever asked. She watched him for a moment longer, then said, You don't have to run, not this time. Jonas stood abruptly, pacing a few feet away. He looked toward the far end of the terminal as if expecting someone to come through the doors at any moment. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. By disappearing, by staying out of sight, but maybe I've just been afraid. Rachel didn't push. She let him wrestle with it. After a long pause, he added, When I woke up in the hospital after the crash, all I could hear was metal bending in my ears. I had a concussion, broken ribs. I didn't even remember what I'd done at first, but when they showed me the photos, something inside me broke. He turned back to Rachel, and it never healed. She stood now too. Maybe it's not supposed to heal completely. Maybe it's meant to become something else. Jonas swallowed hard. I'm not asking him for forgiveness. I know, Rachel said. I just don't want to cause more damage. Rachel nodded. Then speak honestly. That's all anyone can do. Jonas glanced down at his journal again. His thumb traced the edge of one of the taped drawings inside. A child's sketch of a plane flying through blue crayon clouds. Do you think he'd listen? He asked. I don't know, Rachel said, but I think you owe him the chance to decide that for himself. Jonas sat back down slowly, like his legs had suddenly forgotten how to hold him. He rested the journal on his lap, not opening it this time. His hands just sat on top of it, fingers twitching slightly with tension he couldn't release. I came here to do one good thing, he said. Write the check, slip it to the director, and vanish again. No spotlight, no handshakes, no guilt dragging behind me through the press. Rachel sat beside him once more. Maybe this moment is the good thing. Jonas looked over. What do you mean? You're here, he's here. You didn't know that would happen. But maybe it's not an accident. Maybe it's time. He exhaled through his nose, tired. Time for what? An apology? That word doesn't even begin to cover what I took from him. Rachel's voice was calm but firm. Time to stop hiding. Time to let someone else carry even a sliver of the weight with you, or at least hear where the weight came from. Jonas's throat tightened. His eyes dropped to the concrete. What if seeing me makes it worse for him? Rachel was quiet a moment. Then at least it's real. Not a ghost he's been punching in the dark. You're flesh and blood. Not a headline, not a memory. Sometimes, facing the thing you hate most is the first breath after drowning. Jonas looked at her. His voice was nearly a whisper. You talk like someone who's been there. I've watched people I love stay silent for too long, she said. It eats them alive. A long pause stretched between them, filled with the distant thrum of a luggage cart rolling past. Jonas finally reached into his bag. He pulled out a thick envelope, sealed and unmarked. He handed it to Rachel. It's the check for the trauma wing. She took it gently. If I leave now, Jonas said, make sure it gets to the right hands. Rachel stared at the envelope, then looked back at him. And if you stay? Jonas's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Then softly he said, I don't want to hurt him again. Rachel replied, maybe the truth won't hurt. Maybe it'll help him breathe. Jonas looked down at the journal one last time. Then he stood, pressing it into Rachel's hands. Give him this, if he wants it. She took it, surprised. Are you sure? I'm not sure of anything, he said, except that Lily deserves more than my silence. He turned toward the doors. Rachel called gently after him. Jonas? He stopped, but didn't turn around. I think you've already done more than you know. He nodded once, barely. Then he walked out into the Portland air, uncertain of what came next, but lighter by a single, invisible ounce. The sky over Portland had shifted to a soft gray by the time Mia Vargas found herself standing outside the hotel where Jonas Keller had checked in. She hesitated in the lobby, unsure of whether this was the right thing to do. But then she remembered the way Harold's voice cracked when he talked about Lily, and she remembered the look on Keanu's face when he spoke of his own loss. So she asked the front desk for Jonas's room number, rode the elevator in silence, and knocked twice on room 408. It took a moment before the door opened. Jonas looked surprised but not alarmed. He stepped aside and motioned her in, the gesture gentle, uncertain. Mia stepped inside. The room was plain. A small suitcase lay neatly zipped on the bed. On the desk sat a nearly empty coffee cup, a folded copy of the flight manifest, and the same worn leather journal Rachel had described. Jonas looked more tired than she expected, his posture sagging under invisible weight. I'm Mia, she said, offering her hand. I remember, Jonas replied, shaking it softly. Co-pilot, right? Right, she said, sitting in the chair opposite the bed. I wanted to talk to you, off the record, not as a pilot, just as someone who's been in the middle of all this. Jonas sat on the edge of the bed, fingers laced. Mia didn't waste time. Harold didn't fly the plane today because of you. Jonas didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly. Explained the procedure. He saw your name on the passenger list and walked off, she continued. Didn't explain anything at first, just said he couldn't do it. Jonas stared at the carpet. I didn't know he was the pilot, he whispered. I swear. I wouldn't have gotten on if I had known. I believe you, Mia said. That's not why I'm here. I guess I wanted to see for myself who you were, hear from you. So I could decide what to do next. Jonas reached over and picked up the journal from the desk. He held it for a moment, then looked up at her. Rachel already saw this, he said, but I don't think Harold would take it from her. Mia raised her eyebrows slightly. Jonas stood, walked to her, and gently placed the journal in her hands. If you think it will make a difference, give it to him, he said. He doesn't have to read it, but it's the only truth I've got. Mia looked down at the journal. It was heavier than it looked. He opened it slowly, flipping to a random page. December 4th. Today I spoke at a rehab group in downtown LA. There was a teenager there with burn scars. He said he'd never be loved. I told him about Lily. Told him she wanted to build something beautiful. He cried. I cried. I think Lily was there. He turned a few more pages, finding one filled with childlike drawings taped in place. Little notes written in crayon thanking Mr. Jonas for funding their recovery programs. Another page stopped her. May 9th. It's her birthday today. She would have been 21. I bought a cupcake and left it on the front steps of the school she was supposed to attend. Mia blinked hard, her eyes stinging. Mia closed the journal gently and held it in her lap. The weight of it wasn't just physical. It was the weight of grief, of shame, of quiet penance carried across years. She looked up at Jonas, and for a moment there was only silence between them. She loved building gliders with her dad, she said. He still keeps the last one they worked on. It hangs in his garage. Jonas nodded, eyes moist. I read that once in a local article. I clipped it, saved it. She had her whole life mapped out, Mia continued, her voice low. She wanted to intern at NASA before she turned 20. Harold would drive her to science fairs. Sometimes she'd stay up all night sketching aircraft by hand. Jonas swallowed hard. I didn't just end her life, he said. I ended the man she made her plans with. Mia blinked slowly. He's been flying ever since, she said, but not really living. I think the routine keeps him from feeling everything all at once. I understand that, Jonas said quietly. I've been doing the same, just in different clothes. Mia stood, the journal pressed to her chest. You know, she said, most people in your position wouldn't have done any of this. They would have paid a fine, served the sentence, and vanished. You didn't have to write all these letters. You didn't have to fund the trauma wing. You didn't have to show up today. Jonas shook his head. But I did. Yes, Mia said, you did. She took one last look around the room before stepping toward the door. As her hand touched the handle, she turned back. Do you want to say anything to him? If I do give him this. Jonas hesitated, then nodded once. Tell him I never stopped thinking about Lily. That I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope that someday her name means more than pain again. Mia gave a small nod. She left the room and walked down the hallway, the journal still held tightly to her body. Every step felt heavy, like she was carrying something sacred. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped in, staring at her reflection in the mirror inside. The pages inside that journal weren't just apologies. They were a man's attempt to rebuild something, in the dark, alone, without asking for applause or absolution. Maybe Harold would never open it, maybe he wasn't ready, but Mia believed he deserved the choice. Back at the airport hangar, the engines had gone cold. Harold was still sitting in the same spot near the back stairs, hands clasped between his knees. He looked up when he saw her. Mia didn't speak at first. She simply walked over, knelt beside him, and placed the journal in his hands. What's this? He asked, his voice brittle. It's the truth, she said, in his own words. Harold stared at it, uncertain. You don't have to read it, Mia added. But maybe, just maybe, you'll feel her voice between the lines. The sky had darkened slightly, cloud shadows crawling across the tarmac like slow-moving regrets. Harold sat alone near the hangar door, the leather journal still resting in his lap. He hadn't opened it yet. He hadn't even touched the cover since Mia had handed it to him. Something about it felt too alive, too close. Footsteps approached, soft and steady. He didn't look up at first, assuming it was Mia again. But the voice was different. Captain Miles? Harold turned. A woman stood there in a long beige coat, her eyes kind but urgent. She was around 40, tall, with hair pinned back in a neat twist. He recognized her faintly from earlier in the lounge, one of the passengers. I'm Dr. Esther Monroe, she said, offering a small smile. I'm the pediatric neurosurgeon. Harold stood slowly, tucking the journal under his arm. Doctor, may I sit? She asked. He nodded and motioned toward the bench. They sat down together, an odd pairing, an airman weathered by decades of flight, and a healer carrying the weight of a child's fate. I heard from your co-pilot that the flight's been delayed, she said gently. And I understand. It's for personal reasons. Harold's jaw tightened. It's not a technical issue. The plane's ready, I'm not. Dr. Monroe gave a soft nod. I'm not here to pry, she said, or to change your mind. I just wanted to ask for a few minutes. Not for myself, for someone else. Harold looked at her now, more directly. I have a patient, she continued. Her name's Naomi. She's 9, born with a rare spinal condition that's compressing her nerves. We've been trying to get her to Portland Children's Hospital for months now, but this window, it's incredibly small. The lead surgeon flew in just for today. If she doesn't get into pre-opper by this afternoon, we lose the slot, and we won't get another one for 3 months. Harold listened silently. His fingers gripped the edge of the bench. She's losing mobility by the week, Dr. Monroe went on. This morning she couldn't feel her right foot. We're running out of time. Harold nodded slowly. Why was she booked on this flight? Why not a medjet? She's stable enough to fly commercial, and the hospital didn't have budget for a private medical charter. Keanu offered the open seat on his plane when he heard what was happening. Paid for her mother's lodging, too. Harold closed his eyes for a second. I'm not asking you to forgive anyone, Dr. Monroe said. And I'm not asking you to forget. I don't know what happened to your daughter, but I've seen what happens when we let pain create more pain. Harold looked down, his voice low. He killed her. That's the truth. Dr. Monroe nodded gently. And I'm so sorry. She let a breath settle between them before speaking again. But there's a little girl lying in a hospital bed right now, hoping for a chance to walk. And she doesn't know anything about the man who broke your world. But if she misses that surgery, someone else will carry the cost. Harold stared out at the tarmac, the early afternoon light dimming behind low-hanging clouds. Dr. Monroe's words sat heavy in the air, but she didn't push further. She let the silence speak, a quiet invitation for him to wrestle with what came next. After a while, Harold spoke. Her name was Lily, he said. She was 17, smarter than I'll ever be. She wanted to work on aircraft I could only dream of flying. She'd sketched jet engines in her notebooks, built a glider from scratch when she was 14. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my best friend. Dr. Monroe listened, saying nothing. Jean was walking home from a volunteer shift at a local science camp, he continued. She stopped at a crosswalk. He blew through it at 60 miles an hour, said he didn't see her. His voice cracked on that last word. He swallowed hard. She lived for 3 days, but she never woke up. Her mother left a year later. Said she couldn't look at me without seeing Lily. I'm sorry, Dr. Monroe whispered again. I've flown every day since, he said, but I haven't been present for a single one. She turned to him, her voice soft but firm. I can't begin to understand your grief, Captain Miles, but I do understand what it means to carry pain. And I know what it looks like when that pain starts writing the next chapter for us. He glanced at her. What you do matters, she continued. You're not just a pilot. You're a gatekeeper today. A little girl's future is sitting behind a locked door, and you're holding the only key. Harold looked down at the journal in his lap again. I know, he said quietly. I didn't expect to see his name. Not like that, not with no warning. Dr. Monroe gave him a moment. Jonas Keller may never be someone you forgive, but you're not flying for him, she said. You're flying for Naomi, for a child whose future depends on someone rising above their past. Harold's eyes glistened, but he didn't blink. I can't tell you what to do, she finished, but I came here hoping you'd look at this, not as a betrayal of your daughter, but as a way to protect someone else's. She stood, letting her coat fall back into place. Whatever you decide, she added gently. Thank you for listening. Harold watched as she turned and walked back across the hangar, her steps steady, her head held high. When she disappeared around the corner, the silence returned. But it felt different now. He sat alone for several more minutes, the journal still unopened beside him. Then, slowly, he placed it on the bench. He stood up, took a breath, and turned toward the terminal. Somewhere on that plane, a little girl was waiting. And for the first time in years, Harold Miles took a step that didn't belong to his grief. It belonged to hope. Harold sat alone in the small crew break room near the edge of the hangar, the journal resting on the table before him. He had already decided he would fly the plane for the sake of the child, for Naomi. But he hadn't yet made peace with the man who put him in this place, the man whose name was stitched through his pain like wire through flesh. The leather cover felt warm from the sun still coming through the window. Mia had left it with him, again, quietly slipping away without saying much. She had done her part. Now it was his turn to decide what came next. With steady hands, Harold opened to the first page. March 12th. Today marks 4 years since the crash. I don't know why I keep counting. Maybe because I feel like if I stop, then she'll really be gone. I saw a little girl today at the shelter. Her name wasn't Lily, but she had her same laugh, and for a second I forgot to hate myself. Harold's eyes moved slowly across the pages. The handwriting was messy in places, rushed in others. Some entries were stained with smudges he didn't want to think too hard about. Tear stains, maybe. Coffee. Guilt. April 7th. I delivered another anonymous grant, this time to a STEM scholarship program in her name. They didn't ask questions. I told them the only requirement was that it go to girls who dream of flying. Harold's throat tightened. He flipped ahead. October 3rd. I met a girl named Lily today. It almost knocked the wind out of me. She told me she wanted to be an aerospace engineer. I froze. I couldn't speak. But I knew what I had to do. I gave the center a check for her full tuition. I never told them why. Harold read it again and again. Her name. Her dream. In the hands of a stranger. He closed his eyes. The chair creaked beneath him as he leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands cradling his head. His mind replayed Lily's voice, soft and excited, rattling off her latest ideas for a solar-powered glider, her laugh echoing through the garage as she glued wings into place. He hadn't let himself remember her like this in years. He turned more pages. June 5th. I volunteered again today, cleaned the floors, served food, helped a teenager with her college essay. The director pulled me aside and told me they named a reading room after Lily. I didn't ask them to. They did it because they said her name was always the one behind the checks. Harold's hands began to tremble. The journal shifted slightly as he reached for another page. December 29th. Holidays are hard. I always imagine what it would have been like to apologize in person, to meet her father, to ask if there was anything I could do. But there isn't. There never is. So I just keep doing what little I can. I tell myself that maybe one day he'll know, not who I was, but who I tried to become. The words didn't feel like excuses. They felt like offerings. For the first time in 6 years, Harold felt tears rise from a place so deep he had forgotten it existed. Harold wiped his eyes, but the tears kept coming, slowly, steadily, like rain that had waited too long. He wasn't sobbing. It was quieter than that, the kind of crying that came not from fresh pain, but from pain that had sat too long in silence. He turned another page. February 18th. I gave a talk today at a youth rehab center. The topic was accountability, not the kind where you say the right words in court, but the kind where you show up for the rest of your life. A girl in the back raised her hand and asked, "What do you do when no one wants to forgive you?" I told her, "You keep showing up anyway." Harold stared at that sentence. He had spent years convincing himself that nothing Jonas Keller could ever do would matter, that no apology could mend what had been broken, that some wrongs were just too final. But now, with every page, those walls began to crack. The next entry was shorter. March 24th. It's Lily's birthday. I left flowers at the crosswalk again. White lilies this time. I stood there for 20 minutes and didn't say a word. I just tried to listen. Harold closed the journal and held it against his chest. He remembered that crosswalk. He'd gone there too, once a year, until he couldn't take it anymore. He remembered the smell of the asphalt in spring, the way the wind would lift the petals before they hit the ground. He never knew someone else had been going too, standing quietly on the other side of grief. He rose from the chair and paced the room, still clutching the journal like it might disappear if he let go. His thoughts were tangled. He didn't know what this meant. He didn't know what it changed. But something had shifted inside him. He sat again and opened to one last page near the end. August 12th. There's a girl named Lily Chen. She got accepted to MIT. Her application essay mentioned building drones for medical transport in rural areas. I didn't say anything, but I doubled her grant. I see Lily in every child I try to help. I never knew her, but she changed my life, and I just hope she knows, wherever she is, that I never stopped seeing her. Harold dropped his head into his hands. The ache in his chest swelled and released, like a dam bursting open. His shoulders shook. He wasn't crying out of forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't absolution. It was recognition. Recognition of a man who hadn't tried to erase the past, but to carry it, to let it bend his life towards something better. And even if the pain remained, something in Harold softened, if only for a moment. He stood again, wiped his face, and walked toward the hangar doors. The journal remained in his hands. He didn't know if he'd return it. He didn't even know what he would say to Jonas Keller when he saw him. But for the first time in 6 years, he didn't walk away from the memory of Lily. He walked with her. Harold stood at the edge of the hangar, the journal still in his hands. The wind had picked up slightly, whispering through the open doors, carrying the scent of jet fuel and sun-warmed concrete. He watched the horizon for a moment longer, then turned toward the lounge. He didn't head straight there. Instead, he found Keanu by the vending machines near the side corridor. The actor was standing quietly, hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful as he stared through the glass. He looked up as Harold approached. "I need a favor," Harold said. Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Of course." Harold swallowed. "Jonas Keller, could you bring him to the hangar?" Keanu studied Harold's face. There was no visible anger, but the tension was unmistakable. "Are you sure?" Harold looked down at the journal in his hands. "No, but I think I'm ready to hear him." Keanu didn't say anything else. He nodded once and turned to go. It took him only a few minutes to find Jonas, who was still seated in the same lounge chair, staring at nothing. When Keanu spoke his name, Jonas flinched, as if yanked from a dream. "Captain Miles wants to speak with you," Keanu said gently. Jonas looked up, panic spreading across his face. I don't think that's a good idea," he whispered. "I think it is," Keanu replied. "You've waited 6 years. Maybe this is the moment you stop running." Jonas stood slowly. His legs trembled. "What if I make it worse?" Keanu looked him in the eye. "You won't." They walked in silence across the corridor, past the rows of windows and flight monitors, past the entrance to the jetway. As they neared the hangar, Jonas's steps slowed. Keanu turned to him. "He's not expecting anything, just honesty." Jonas nodded once. His hand was trembling at his side. Then Keanu stepped back and let Jonas walk the final 20 feet alone. Inside the hangar, Harold stood still. The journal was clutched loosely in his right hand. He didn't move as Jonas approached, didn't speak until the man was 5 feet away. Jonas stopped there, unsure if he should move closer. "Do you know what this is?" Harold asked, lifting the journal slightly. Jonas swallowed. "Yes." Harold stared at him, then nodded. "I read it." Jonas looked like he might crumble under the weight of that sentence. "I don't know what to say," Jonas began. Harold raised a hand, silencing him. "Tell me why you carry her name every day," he said. His voice wasn't harsh, It was tired, hollow. Jonas's eyes welled with tears. He didn't blink them away. "Because I see her," he said, voice breaking. "In every child I meet, in every kid I help. I see her. Even though I never really knew her, I see who she could have been." Harold looked down at the floor. Jonas continued, softer now. "I've tried to do one good thing a day for the last 2,000 days. Some days it's a donation. Other days it's just showing up for a teenager who needs someone to tell them they matter. I know it doesn't erase anything. I know it never will." Harold remained silent, his eyes focused on the journal, his jaw tight. Jonas took a shaky breath. His hands were trembling now, but he didn't step back. "I never asked for forgiveness," he said, "because I never felt like I deserved it. I just hoped that maybe if I kept walking in the right direction, someone out there would feel it. Not me. Her. That she mattered." Harold looked up at last, his eyes locked with Jonas. "She mattered," he said. "Every second of her mattered." A silence fell between them, thick, heavy, but not hostile. Jonas nodded slowly. "I believe that. I do." Harold stepped forward. 1 step. 2. He raised the journal again, this time with both hands, and then extended it toward Jonas. "She changed you," Harold said, "but she never got to know that." Jonas took the journal with trembling fingers. "I wish I could have told her." Harold's voice was quiet. "So do I." Another pause. Then Harold added, "But I think she sees it now." Jonas let out a breath that was more sob than sigh. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry every day. I don't expect anything. I just want to keep building something that honors her." Harold didn't reply for a long moment. Then he looked toward the plane, visible through the side of the hangar. "There's a little girl on that plane," he said. "She has a chance to walk again. And I nearly stopped her from getting that chance, because I was too full of hate to see what was right in front of me." Jonas remained silent, the journal pressed to his chest. "I'm not ready to forgive you," Harold said. "Maybe I never will." Jonas nodded. "I understand." "But I see you," Harold added, "and I believe Lily would have seen you too." That broke something open in Jonas. His knees buckled slightly, and he caught himself on a nearby support beam. Tears streamed down his face. Harold didn't comfort him. He didn't move closer. But he didn't walk away either. They stood there, 2 men who had lost everything that could have made them friends, yet found themselves face to face with something deeper than forgiveness. Standing, a few feet behind them, Keanu stood just out of sight. He didn't interfere. He simply watched. And when Jonas finally gathered himself and nodded once more, Harold gave the smallest, quietest sign of agreement. It wasn't peace, but it was something that could become peace if given time. And for the first time in years, both men felt like they had just taken 1 step closer to it. The wind had shifted. Outside the hangar, the clouds drifted in a slow, graceful rhythm across the late morning sky. Inside, Harold stood still for one last moment, his face calm in a way it hadn't been in years. He turned toward the door, where Mia stood waiting. Her eyes searched his face. He met her gaze and nodded. "Tell the tower we're taking off." She didn't respond with words, just a look of relief that held something deeper. Respect, maybe even awe. Then she moved, quick and efficient, back toward the flight office. Harold turned to Keanu and Jonas. "Let's go," he said quietly. The walk back to the jet was steady. No one rushed. No one looked back. It was as if the past had been acknowledged, not buried, and now they could carry it differently. Rachel and Dr. Monroe stood just outside the boarding steps. Rachel's eyebrows lifted in quiet surprise when she saw Harold. Esther placed a hand over her heart, a silent thank you written across her expression. Jonas lingered at the bottom of the stairs, unsure whether he should follow. Harold paused at the top and looked down at him. "You're on this flight," he said, "same as the rest of us." Jonas exhaled slowly, then climbed the stairs. Inside the cabin, passengers returned to their seats. Keanu sat near the rear, next to the window. Rachel settled beside him, a mixture of tension and calm lingering in her features. From the cockpit, Mia's voice came over the intercom. "We've been cleared for departure. Please fasten seatbelts." Harold entered the cockpit without a word and took his seat. His hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, but his heart felt different, lighter. Not free, but no longer chained to something that dragged him backward. Mia glanced over. "You good?" Harold nodded. "Let's fly." The engines came alive with a deep, rolling hum that vibrated through the cabin. The wheels turned. The runway appeared ahead like a fresh beginning, and the jet began to move. In the cabin, Esther looked at her phone. The surgical team in Portland had just confirmed the patient was stable, prepped, and waiting. Time was still tight, but now possible. Keanu leaned back slightly in his seat, eyes out the window. The jet gained speed. The nose lifted, the world tilted, and just like that, they were in the air. As the jet climbed steadily into the blue, silence wrapped the cabin. Not the kind filled with discomfort, but the kind that allowed people to breathe, to think, to feel something again. Keanu looked out at the cotton clouds passing beneath them. His reflection hovered in the glass, soft and quiet. He thought about Harold in the cockpit, about the man who almost grounded an entire flight over grief, and about the courage it took not to. Rachel glanced over and saw the way his hands were folded, the way his jaw set when he was deep in thought. She didn't interrupt. Instead, she just whispered, "You helped him more than you know." Keanu didn't answer, but something shifted in his eyes. Further up the cabin, Jonas sat alone. His hands were pressed together like in prayer, resting against his lips. The journal was back in his bag. He hadn't opened it since handing it to Harold. But now, in the quiet of altitude, he allowed himself a thought he hadn't had in years. Maybe healing wasn't found in forgiveness. Maybe it began the moment someone stopped hating you. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to rest. In the cockpit, the sunlight spilled in from the curved windshield, lighting up every dial and switch. Mia flew steady beside Harold, but her eyes kept flicking toward him. His hands were calm, steady, as if all the years of turbulence inside had finally quieted. "You're really doing this?" she said softly. Harold kept his eyes ahead. It was never about the flight. It was about letting go. Mia nodded. "Does it feel different?" she asked. He thought for a second, then answered, "It feels like I'm not flying alone." Back in the cabin, Esther leaned her head back and let out a long breath. The little girl waiting in Portland still had a chance now, and she knew it was because people had chosen something difficult today. Not efficiency, not protocol, but compassion. Keanu looked down at the worn leather bracelet around his wrist, one he'd worn every day since the loss of his own daughter, Ava. He traced his thumb over the frayed edges. "Some people fly to escape," he murmured under his breath. "Today, we fly to heal." Rachel turned slightly. "What did you say?" He looked at her and smiled. "Nothing. Just thinking." The jet continued toward Portland, carrying with it more than passengers. It carried regrets and redemptions, stories and second chances. And above all, it carried a kind of quiet bravery, the kind that doesn't look heroic, but changes everything. The hum of the engines created a quiet rhythm, steady and comforting. Outside the windows, clouds drifted like whispers, brushing against the sky with soft grace. Inside the cabin, there was calm. Not the kind born of silence alone, but of something deeper. A shared peace. Dr. Esther Monroe sat in her seat with a small metal case open on her tray table. Inside were her instruments, sterile and neatly organized. She wasn't planning to operate on the plane, of course, but she was using the time to go through every step of the procedure again. Muscle memory mattered, and she needed every edge she could give herself. The girl waiting in Portland was young, her spine fragile, her time running out, but this flight had bought them back the one thing they needed most: possibility. Across the aisle, Keanu Reeves sat beside Jonas Keller. There were no cameras, no press, no dramatic spotlight, just two men, one quietly sipping tea, the other clutching a weathered leather journal like it was the last piece of himself still intact. Keanu turned slightly. "You've written a lot," he said gently. Jonas nodded. "Over 2,000 pages, but none of them made me feel lighter." Keanu didn't interrupt. He let the man speak. "They were full of guilt," Jonas continued. "Regret. Apologies I could never send. I thought writing them would take the weight off, but it never did." Keanu paused, choosing his words with care. "Maybe," he said slowly, "it's time to write new ones. Not to the past, but to the future." Jonas looked over, confused. "Letters not of guilt," Keanu added, "but of legacy. What if that journal became something more than memory?" Jonas blinked. "You think I should keep writing?" "I think you already know what Lily would have wanted," Keanu said. "You just haven't let yourself believe you deserve to do it." Jonas lowered his eyes. "She had dreams, big ones. Her father told me once she wanted to build rockets, to send people safely across the stars." Keanu nodded. "So maybe you help someone else do that. Maybe you write letters that light their path." The words sank deep. Jonas didn't answer immediately, but after a long silence, he opened the journal and turned to a blank page. He stared at it, then slowly picked up a pen. The pen hovered just above the page. Jonas's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of starting something without shame. His first stroke was shaky. Then, with a breath, he wrote, "To the girl who dreams of building rockets." It wasn't addressed to Lily, not this time. It was to the future, to the next child, to the one who might never meet her, but who might carry her dream forward. Across the cabin, Rachel watched him with a quiet sort of reverence. She said nothing, but she saw something change in Jonas's posture. Not lighter, exactly, but straighter, as if he had decided not to carry everything alone anymore. Mia stepped out of the cockpit briefly and walked down the aisle. Her eyes met Keanu's, then shifted to Jonas. She didn't speak either, just gave a slight nod and returned to her station. Back in the cockpit, Harold kept his hand steady on the controls. They were nearing descent. He checked his instruments, adjusted altitude, and kept his breathing measured. Flying was second nature, but today it meant something different. He glanced at the photo clipped beside the throttle. Lily, grinning, wind in her hair, a frozen moment of joy. He touched the edge of the frame with one finger, and this time, he didn't feel pain. He felt her near. Back in the cabin, Keanu leaned closer to Jonas again. "What are you writing?" he asked gently. Jonas turned the journal slightly, revealing the words on the page. It wasn't much yet. A few lines, a beginning. "She had a name once," Jonas said, "but now she's everywhere. Every child, every second chance." Keanu smiled. "Then don't stop writing." Below them, Portland began to appear through the thinning clouds, green and vibrant, like a promise waiting to be kept. In the cabin, Esther closed her case and looked at the clock. If everything went as planned, they'd land in time. The surgical team would be waiting. The child would still have a shot. She looked around at the passengers who had once been strangers and now shared a bond forged in silence and heartbreak and small, brave decisions. The plane began to descend. The soft chime of the intercom rang out. Mia's voice was calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach into Portland. Please make sure seatbelts are fastened. We'll be on the ground shortly." Jonas closed the journal and placed it gently on the tray in front of him. His hands didn't shake anymore. Outside the window, the world came closer, slowly rising to meet them. And for the first time in a very long while, Jonas Keller didn't dread what waited on the ground. The wheels of the jet made contact with the Portland runway in the fading light of early evening. The landing was smooth, unremarkable to anyone unaware of the emotional storm that had preceded it. But for those inside the cabin, every second of descent felt charged with something greater than flight, something redemptive. Dr. Esther Monroe was the first to move. She stood as soon as the jet stopped taxiing and met the eyes of Mia, who nodded and unlatched the door. On the tarmac, a team of paramedics waited beside a white medical van, engine running, rear doors already open. There was no chaos, just quiet urgency. Clutching her case, Esther descended the stairs and entered the ambulance without a word. It pulled away within seconds, heading for the children's hospital 20 minutes away. Time, in her world, was always hungry. Back on the plane, silence lingered. Jonas didn't speak. Neither did Harold, but both of them, in their own corners, felt the shift. Harold remained in the cockpit for a long time after everyone had disembarked. His hands still rested on the controls, but his eyes stared through the windshield toward the distant city skyline. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the day he lost Lily. He was thinking about a little girl he'd never meet. 2 hours later, Rachel received a message on her phone and immediately shared it with Keanu, who was seated beside Jonas in the passenger lounge. "She made it," she whispered. "Esther said the surgery was successful. The spine is intact. They got there in time." Jonas turned away, covering his face. Harold, standing quietly by the windows on the far side, heard every word. He didn't say anything. But his eyes, which had been rimmed in silence for so long, began to glisten. The months that followed were not filled with headlines or interviews. There were no press conferences or awards. There was just steady human work. And in that space, something remarkable began to take shape. Rachel was the one who first spoke the idea aloud. She was reviewing grant proposals for nonprofit partnerships when she casually mentioned that Lily had once dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. Mia, who overheard the comment, turned to her and asked, "What if we helped someone else live that dream?" It started as a conversation over coffee. Then it became a late-night call to Keanu. Then a Zoom meeting with Dr. Monroe and the hospital board. Then an email from Jonas. Then a quiet visit from Harold. Piece by piece, what had once been an abstract wish turned into a project proposal. To build a specialized pediatric trauma and rehabilitation wing dedicated to emergency medical aviation. A center that would bridge the work of doctors and pilots. A space where young lives on the edge could find a way back. Keanu agreed to fund the architectural redesign. He requested only one thing, that the design include natural light, places for children to play, and somewhere outdoors where they could look up at the sky. Jonas offered to fund the wing itself, anonymously at first, but after conversations with Rachel and Harold, he chose to sign his name to the donation, not for recognition, but because hiding no longer made sense. If Lily's name was going to help others, then maybe so could his. The wing was named the Lily Miles Children's Flight Center. Harold signed off on the naming only after deep consideration. He didn't want Lily's memory trapped in sorrow. He wanted her name to represent something vibrant and life-giving. The center's mission was clear: to serve as a hub for pediatric emergency transport and post-trauma rehabilitation. The concept fused Harold's world of aviation with Dr. Monroe's world of critical pediatric care. Keanu worked closely with the architectural team. His vision was grounded in warmth, not spectacle. The building's interior was filled with curved walls, skylights, and interactive models of vintage aircraft donated by engineers and designers. The outer garden became Keanu's personal passion project. In one corner stood an aluminum sculpture shaped like a rising aircraft with no wings. Beneath it was an inscription that read, "We lift each other. That's how we fly." Jonas didn't attend any of the planning meetings. He preferred to stay in the background, but he was always reading the updates, always asking how things were going. When it came time to purchase the final equipment, he quietly covered the difference that remained after donations slowed. His journal entries became part of the hospital's wellness exhibit for children coping with trauma, anonymously printed and placed in a corner titled Letters to Hope. The day of the dedication arrived on a bright spring morning. Families, doctors, engineers, and community leaders gathered beneath the white awning in front of the new wing. Rows of folding chairs lined the courtyard. The hum of children laughing echoed through the space, mingling with the breeze and the soft sound of mobile sculptures spinning overhead. Keanu arrived with no fanfare, no camera crew, no announcement. He walked in wearing a light blazer and jeans. Rachel trailed behind, smiling politely but deflecting reporters. Dr. Esther Monroe took the podium with the young girl whose surgery had marked the turning point in all their lives. The girl's name was Aria. She was walking now, slowly, carefully, but without help. Esther began her speech by describing the night of the flight, how she had watched time slipping away, how it had been Harold's decision to take off that made the difference. She turned toward him in the audience and nodded. Harold nodded back. Then Esther pointed to the girl beside her. "You're looking at the future," she said, "but today is about the past, about a child named Lily, whose dream was to fly and whose name now carries others forward, about a man who crashed, a man who flew, and a man who forgave, and about a building that will help heal what life sometimes breaks." When she stepped back, applause rang out, not loud or raucous, but deep and sustained. Harold remained seated beside Jonas. Neither had moved. Then Harold slowly stood and extended a hand toward Jonas, not for a handshake, but to walk with him toward the dedication plaque together. They moved through the aisle as one. Rachel took a photo, not for social media, just to remember. As the crowd dispersed and families entered the center, Keanu stayed behind in the garden. He looked up at the sculpture, hands in his pockets. He read the words again, softly under his breath. "We lift each other, that's how we fly." Behind him, the sound of children filled the air. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting a warm amber glow over the quiet stretch of forest outside Portland. The trees stood tall and still, their branches catching the light like gentle waves. At the base of one tree, an old maple that had stood untouched for nearly 2 decades, lay a small weathered plaque, half hidden in moss. The engraving, though faint, could still be read if you looked closely. "In loving memory of Lily Miles, 199722014. She dreamed of the sky." Keanu and Harold walked slowly up the path. The leaves crunched softly beneath their feet. Neither spoke as they approached the tree. Keanu carried a small wooden box in one hand. Harold, hands in his jacket pockets, glanced at the tree and then at the box. They reached the base and paused. Harold knelt down first. He brushed his hand over the plaque, clearing some of the moss with his sleeve. His fingers hovered above the name, tracing it without touch. "She used to come here every weekend," Harold said, his voice quiet. "She'd sit under this tree with her model kits. We'd bring glue, paints, little brushes. She'd build airplanes right here on this patch of ground. I used to tell her this was her launch pad." Keanu opened the wooden box and held out its contents. A miniature model plane, hand-painted with silver wings and tiny blue letters along the tail. LM-1. "She would have loved this," Harold whispered. Together, they gently fastened the plane to the lowest branch. It hung just above eye level, swaying lightly in the breeze, a symbol of something small but infinite. A few steps behind them stood Jonas. He hadn't spoken since they arrived. He wore a dark coat and held something pressed flat against his chest, a folded drawing on hospital stationery. A child had given it to him during his last visit to the trauma wing. It was a simple image, 3 people holding hands. One had wings, One had a stethoscope. One held a tiny airplane. The child had written one word above the figures: heroes. Jonas stepped closer but didn't interrupt. He stood just far enough to respect their space, close enough to share the moment. Harold rose slowly and turned. His eyes met Jonas's. They didn't need to speak. They had spoken enough. Instead, Harold reached out and gestured slightly toward the tree. Jonas understood. He moved forward and unfolded the drawing. He took a small rock from the base of the plaque and tucked the drawing beneath it, just beside the model plane's string. The image fluttered slightly, then settled. 3 men stood there for a long time. No one moved. No one filled the silence. It was the kind of quiet that didn't demand words, the kind that spoke through breath and presence. The wind moved through the branches overhead. The model plane spun gently, catching the light just as the last rays of the sun broke through the trees. Keanu looked up at it, then back at the earth. His voice came softly. "Some journeys never truly end," he said. "They become something greater. A second chance, a healing path, a legacy." Harold closed his eyes. Jonas bowed his head. The shadows stretched longer across the forest floor, touching the edge of the plaque, the base of the tree, and finally the shoes of 3 men whose lives had been forever changed by a moment in the past and a choice in the present. The walk back down the forest path was slow. None of them rushed it. The sun had vanished beyond the horizon now, and only a gentle afterglow lingered between the trees. Keanu walked a step behind Harold and Jonas, letting them move at their own pace. Each footstep sounded deliberate, measured, honest. At the trailhead, Rachel waited beside the car. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She simply opened the door when she saw them approach. Jonas paused before stepping in. He turned toward Harold. "If there's ever anything I can do—" "Anything," he said, voice trembling. "You only have to ask." Harold didn't reply with words. He placed a hand on Jonas's shoulder. A simple gesture. But for Jonas, it meant everything. They drove in silence most of the way back. The city lights blinked to life in the distance, but no one seemed to notice. When they reached the edge of the hospital district, Jonas asked to be dropped off near the new wing. He wanted to walk the last block alone. As Keanu's car pulled away, Jonas stood by the sidewalk, watching the illuminated letters above the glass doors of the new building. The Lily Miles Children's Flight Center. He placed his hand on his chest, where the journal always rested beneath his coat. Inside, a nurse pushing a wheelchair looked up, spotted him through the glass, and waved. A child turned in the chair and waved too. Jonas waved back. His heart ached, but in a different way now. It wasn't pain anymore. It was something else. A longing to do more. A reason to keep going. Back in the car, Rachel looked at Keanu in the rearview mirror. "You think they'll ever be friends?" Keanu gave a half smile. "Maybe," he said. But healing doesn't always mean walking the same path. Sometimes it just means not carrying the weight alone. They didn't speak for the rest of the ride. Later that evening, Keanu sat in his hotel room by the window. He looked out over the city as the last bits of daylight faded into deep blue. He held Lily's model plane in his hand, the same design they'd hung at the memorial, a duplicate Rachel had asked a craftsman to make. He thought of Ava, of his own daughter's short life. He imagined what she might have looked like at 9, what kind of questions she might have asked, what she would have thought of him today. He whispered softly into the room, "We lift each other. That's how we fly." Then he placed the model gently on the table beside a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. He began to write. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever forgiven someone you thought you never could? Have you ever carried the weight of guilt and found a way to turn it into something meaningful? Let us know in the comments below. We read every one of them. And if you'd like to see more stories with Keanu Reeves, stories of redemption, healing, and humanity, tell us what you want to see next. Your story could be the spark that inspires the next video. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.